All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Give people a chance to pop in here. See the numbers rising. Welcome. Up to 30 now, 31. Very nice. Okay, so as you can see on your screen, we're here for the latest installment of the Athletics Canada webinar series, Strength Training, Understanding the When, How, and What throughout the season. Thank you for coming aboard. My name is John Franco. I'm the Manager of Coaching Education for Athletics Canada. And today we have with us a star panel of Tommy Gingras, Nick Stoffberg, and Kelsey Balkwill. And I'm gonna let them sort of introduce themselves, but before I do that, I'm just gonna do a little housekeeping. So if you haven't been with us before, you're all muted and we're on sort of webinar mode. So if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom there. You are also welcome to poser des questions en français si vous voulez. Par écrit, et je vais les traduire pour le panel. We are gonna go in, we have a bit of a different setup today. Tommy's actually gonna present straight for us with some PowerPoints for about 15 minutes, and then we're gonna go into the panel and talk about that presentation, ask some questions, and then we will get to your questions. We had some questions come in registration, which is awesome. I know people are really keen on this topic, so that's great. And so if you have questions as things are going on, pop them into the in the Q&A. And Kyle, our coordinator Kyle, is working behind the scenes to make sure that we get those questions seen. And finally, for coaches who are certified, if you've entered your NCCP number, you will get 1 professional development point for this webinar. One more bit of housekeeping. Speaking of webinars, the next big online event for us is coming up in April, on the April 9th, 10th weekend. It's the Atlantic Speed Power Summit. And we've got some really high profile speakers there. Got Frank Dick, Coach Bouchek, Nader, Angela White, Sharon Hannon. You can see on the screen there a few of the other names. We'll also have some free panels during the week. So the week before, which is Thursday, the 7th of April, you can see our bottom row there, that's our jumps panel. And then the week after, on the Thursday, April 13th, we're going to have our main speakers back to talk about building an IST. So there's a lot going on in that one. And you can register. I think Kyle's going to pop the link in the chat so that you can see, there it is. So you can register for that and get some more good online learning. All right, so with that, why don't we just go quickly around the table here? We'll start with Kelsey. Maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you're doing now. People may know you in one way, but maybe you can tell them about your coaching career as well. And yeah, why don't you start us off, please?
Hi everyone. So obviously I'm Kelsey. I have been an elite athlete for a while, and I kind of was doing both coach athlete for a number of years. So I've been coaching for probably 13 years now. I started when I was a freshman in college, kind of unofficially, and the last couple of years I've just tried to get into it a little bit more. I got my master's in kin, and then kind of just moved on from there. I'm getting my master's in psych right now too, and so just coaching on the side with Varsity.
Awesome, thank you. We also have with us Nick Stoffberg.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I am Nick Stoffberg. I'm from Alberta right now. I'm the technical manager operations at Athletics Alberta. Over a number of years, I've been coaching from probably about 2001 to the most recent year, from the developmental level through college. And right now I'm just, trying to learn.
Awesome. Yeah, we're all trying to learn. And so Tommy, can you tell us where you fit in and maybe mention a bit your relationship to the 2 other panelists?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Tommy. As a coach, I'm kind of in a blended role of strength and conditioning and track and field. Competed in track and field in university, but I've always had a passion for S&C and have worked at a number of different universities across the country, working with strength and conditioning in both track and field and other sports as well, namely court sports. And when I was out west, I worked directly with Nick. We worked together. And then I'm currently coaching in Windsor with Border City. So kind of have a current colleague and a former colleague on this call, where I've kind of been in a blended role of track and strength conditioning.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, as I said, we're gonna have Tommy do a bit of a sort of a presentation with the slides and stuff for us, and then we'll use that as our sort of fodder for discussion. So Tommy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, John. Okay, so I'll bring these slides up and then we'll be good to go. So yeah, as John alluded to, we're going to be talking today about strength training, particularly here for athletics or track and field. And so kind of why we're here, obviously we're here to talk about strength training, but hopefully it's to solve the strength training puzzle and where does it fit into what we're doing as coaches. And many of you on the call would know, as athletics coaches, it goes beyond just technical, tactical coaching. Some of you are going to be responsible for the S&C. Some of you are probably responsible from a club admin or managerial standpoint. You might run events and, host meets and all these different things. So you're tasked with a lot, and there might be a number of different barriers that are in the way of maybe implementing what you would consider to be an optimal strength conditioning program. And so hopefully the goal today is to, hopefully remove some of those barriers, whether it's a perceived lack of knowledge, perceived lack of confidence. Maybe you don't have a weight room. Maybe you have not enough time in your sessions. Maybe you don't have the equipment you need or anything like that. So hopefully the presentation and the talk gives you some ideas on how you can use some of these things moving forward. So briefly, just the meet schedule of kind of what I'm going to do today is just going to talk about some of the common traits of strength or different types of strength that we might be trying to, produce in our athletes, and some of the ways that we can address them and the methods we can use it. So the strength traits we're going to talk about today are general strength, maximal strength, power. You may have also heard it called rate of force development before, kind of go hand in hand, same thing. And same with plyometric strength or reactive strength. These are obviously not the only qualities we can focus on, but these four do a pretty good job of kind of casting an umbrella over all the different qualities or traits you might be trying to train for. And if you've put together something in the weight room, you've probably had some of these traits or abilities in mind. You want to get your athletes stronger or more powerful or become more reactive, something like that. So that's why I've kind of chose to cover these ones today. So if we start off with kind of general strength and what is it? It's not really hyper focused on anything, hence the name general strength. And this is usually some form of resistance training done with lighter loads. It's not high fatigue. So there's, usually not reps to failure or anything like that. There's a wide variety of movements. We're going up, down, left, right, forwards, backwards, single limb, double limb. We're moving all over the place. And the reason I have this bucket of sand picture is because someone described it once to me as sand, and it kind of fills in the cracks or glues things together. So if you had a jar and you put big rocks in the jar, that fills up most of it. But then you can sprinkle in some sand to kind of fill in the edges and fill in the cracks. And that's what general strength is. It's nothing hyper focused. It's not going to be the be all and end all in training, but it will provide you with the opportunity to get your athletes moving a little bit differently and doing some different things than they're used to. And so one of the best ways we can potentially put this in our programming is if we think of sampling. So the example I'm going to use is, imagine you were going to Costco, for any of those who have gone shopping at a Costco before, and there's at the end of every aisle, it seems, if you go on the weekend, there's somebody offering food samples and things like that. And you go through the store and you're collecting a bunch of different food samples along the way. Some of it might be dinners, could be lunches, desserts, frozen foods, snacks, all finger foods, all sorts of different things. And by the time you get to the end of your trip and you leave, you haven't really had a complete meal, and you're probably still a little bit hungry, even though you've eaten. And that's a little bit general strength. It's sampling. It's a whole bunch of different things. It's not overly fatiguing. It's not overly heavy. You'd probably leave that session wanting a little bit more in terms of, I could have lifted heavier, or I could be a little bit more tired. Again, we're just building confidence in different types of movements. Then we can start to load a little bit heavier and kind of get into the realm of maximal strength. And simply put, maximal strength is the most amount of force that muscles can produce. So the muscles will squeeze as hard as they can. They create the most amount of tension possible. And that's how we produce the highest levels of force. And this is what actually drives the change. So anytime we have the muscles squeezing really hard and creating that high level of tension, that's what's going to get the body to go, oh, I better make the muscles stronger. I better make the nervous system better at this. And so that's the key thing that we're looking for if we want to build maximal strength. So the phrase I kind of associate with max strength is this idea of big squeeze, or this high level of tension. And what we're looking for is high effort bouts of what we're doing. So if you think in a classic weight room sense, probably going less than 5 reps, and we're leaving reps in the tank. And what I mean by this is, let's say we had a weight we could do 3 times. We're probably only going to do it once or twice in each set. And that's because we want to have that highest possible level of tension, that biggest possible squeeze. And if we fatigue ourselves too quickly, we can't come back and repeat that effort. And one of the reasons I like this concept of a big squeeze or creating a ton of tension is because it opens the door to do it in a number of different ways. We often think of max strength as heavy deadlift or heavy squat or heavy bench press, and then we need a weight room and we need equipment for that. But you could push a car in the parking lot with some of your athletes potentially, and that's going to create that high level of tension in the lower body. You could take a towel and loop it around a fence post or a telephone pole or whatever's nearby and try to pull that as hard as you can. It's not going anywhere, and your muscles are going to squeeze as hard as they possibly can. Try to push a wall or take an immovable object and try to move it. The muscles are going to be squeezing as hard as they can. So we could still potentially get maximal strength adaptations or changes without being in a weight room with traditional means available. And then we can move on to power. And power is how quickly we can produce that force or how quickly we can move. And the big thing that'll drive the change here is moving load quickly. So with maximal strength, we had a lot of load and we were probably moving very slowly. With power, we're going to have less load and we're going to be moving very quickly. And that's the difference that drives the change in terms of power and rate of force development. And so the phrase I sometimes like to attach to this is this idea of load and explode. We have some type of mass or load or weight with us, and then we explode and we move really quickly. And anything that does this is going to help us to develop power and rate of force development. And we want to have a lot of intent behind this, and we want the movement speed to stay high. So similar to maximal strength, we're probably not going to be super fatigued from doing this because we want to make sure we leave enough capacity or energy to be able to move as quick as we can on every rep, because that's what's driving the change. And typically what we'll see is as you have more experience, you can use more load with this. So for example, if you had a 12 or 13-year-old child coming out with your club or team or organization, the idea of loading, exploding might just be a body weight jump. Their body weight might be enough mass, and then them jumping is fast enough. If you were working with an elite athlete who's trying to make an Olympic Games or World Championships, you might be in the weight room using cleans or snatch or something like that with much more load because they have more experience and they can move it faster. And on that note, one of the things that I like about the load and explode idea is it can kind of take our thinking away of power or rate of force development is not just weightlifting. We tend to think clean, snatch, jerk, and we kind of zero in on that realm and go, that's how we develop power. But there are a number of different ways that we can do that. Because again, maybe we don't have the technical expertise in weightlifting or the equipment, but we could, any med ball throws are going to develop power. There's load and you're exploding. You could, as I used the example before, the younger athlete jumping with their body weight forward, up, whatever, that can develop power. You could put rice bags in a backpack and have them do vertical jumps. There's a number of different ways where if you just add load to something and then have them explode and move quickly, you're going to develop power. And then the last one I'll touch on is plyometric or reactive strength. And this is how quickly we can produce force in reaction to the ground. So with power, rate of force development, we have complete control. I'm standing on the ground, I load up when I'm ready, and I jump when I'm ready. With plyometric strength, we are sort of in a free fall. So we might be dropping off of something, and then we get to the ground and we have to quickly produce force and rebound the other way. So any plyometric exercise is going to have this land and rebound action. And this is what drives the change. So if we want to be more reactive, we have to include this land and rebound element. And I like to use the phrase hot coals. Nick and Kelsey have probably heard me say this before if I'm working with the athletes, and gets the idea of we want to land and get off the ground nice and quickly. So any drill, any exercise where the athlete is thinking about being on hot coals, that's going to develop that plyometric strength because we are producing force in reaction to the ground very quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is really common in our sport. Sprinting, jumping, hurdling, all these things have very brief contact times. And there's a good chance with any of the jumping and bounding and foot contact drills you're doing in practice, this is probably already a quality you're developing. But if you aren't, then these are ways that you can add it into to other aspects of your programming to develop this strength. And so as far as season planning, you can think about sort of your event area. You're experts in your given event and you know it better than anybody else would. And so these 4 qualities, you'd want to train these qualities with all your athletes to some extent. And depending on your event area, you may end up putting more or less focus on these qualities. So in terms of season planning, you'd have all of them present, just to varying degrees. And I've kind of put this together as a loose sort of quadrant idea of where some of the events would fall. So for example, a thrower is going to spend more time focusing on max strength and power than maybe a middle distance runner who's going to spend more time doing plyometric or general strength things, for example. But we can dive into this a little bit deeper in the questions if there's anything. So if there was nothing you remember from this presentation, just as a final slide and takeaways, if you remember the drivers of change, that could be a tremendous help to you. So if you think about sampling, think about big squeeze, load and explode, and hot coals, those are the keys that you're going to need to develop some of these qualities. So if there's nothing you take away, just remember those 4 things and hopefully they help. And then, yeah, John, I can stop sharing my screen and then we can jump into the panel questions and kind of get this conversation rolling.
Great. Thanks so much, Tommy. That was awesome. I see in the chat, Scott Davis commenting, that was a great image, that last one. And I know when Kyle and I were talking about your presentation before, we also really enjoyed that last sort of visual of where it can all fit. So that's awesome. So the questions that we have lined up kind of start bigger picture, kind of more like logistics and stuff, and then get, maybe more and more granular as we go. So we'll start with this question, which is, and I think, anybody can just kind of jump in. And what I'd like to hear is sort of each of your perspectives, from your experience on this. Should a coach try to plan and monitor strength, all on his or her own, or work with a strength coach? And what are some of the best practices for, kind of one or the other, depending on your situation? Nick, you want to start since you raised your eyebrows?
It seemed like he was ready to chime in.
Yeah, he's got something to say. That's great. That's what we want.
I think for sure, anytime you can bring in someone outside of your field that's going to bring their own perspective and point of view to that conversation, the better off you are. The big thing for me is as long as you can have that conversation, right? So Tommy and I weren't necessarily, when we worked together, in the same space at all the same time, but we communicated enough that I could trust he was going to develop one thing and I was going to develop the other, or we'd be pushing in the same direction. If I'll just tie it back to his slide, and he talked about what is your intent, whether it's the weight room or the track, and as long as we're having those conversations ongoing throughout the year, then it's achievable. So yes, work with a strength coach if you have the option.
Cool. Kelsey, what's your experience been in that area?
I would say I've had both. When I was in college, I didn't have a strength coach that really talked to the track coach, and it was just a very bumpy road. When they don't talk to each other, it's just a lot harder to do the work. And then when they mesh together, then it works well. So I would say the same as Nick. It needs to be a conversation of what we're trying to accomplish in that phase of what we're doing. And I feel like track coaches are great at networking and all talking to each other about everything. So adding in a strength coach like that is just the easiest thing to do.
Communication is key, as always.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So Tommy, as sort of the strength coach in some instances, how do you feel about that? What do you look for when you're trying to work with an event coach?
I mean, I was actually going to speak more from my perspective, because it's, as the strength coach, we have to come in and develop trust with the coaches and the athletes. And so I think anytime you can find an expert in their field, whether that's a strength coach, a psychologist, nutritionist, whoever, is the presence is key. And to give you an example, when I worked court sports at some of the other universities, I was on the court warming up those volleyball and basketball teams. I was at the games warming them up. I was making my presence known both in the weight room and in the field of play. And I think that can help build what, Kelsey and Nick have talked about, that communication and the trust amongst people. Is if a strength coach or any coach who's going to be part of your IST can make themselves present in the other areas of training as well, I think that goes a long way to building that trust and the communication to give the athlete the best possible service.
That's awesome, and perfect segue to the next question, which is about how much experience would an athlete need to be able to lift on their own? I think if they're just starting and they're learning things, they need someone there to kind of teach them and coach them. Is there a point where, as either a strength coach or an event group coach, you feel comfortable saying like, okay, here's your plan, I trust that you do it, without having to be there? Anyone?
I think specifically with club coaching, it's a lot harder for a lot of us to be in the weight room with kids, just timing wise and sending kids off. So I think that teaching the foundations like during practice is important. And I think it depends on the athlete and what they're trying to do, of how long it takes. So I don't think there's like there's a 2-week time, or like you do this intro. Like some kids aren't just going to get it. Some kids aren't as coordinated. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it takes shorter amount of time. So I think it really just depends on the kid and having that conversation with them before sending them out to do it by themselves, because it's more of like a safety thing of them not hurting themselves when they're there, or just like making up things when they're there that they see on Instagram or think are cool. And they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to try it. And then you come back and you're like, how did you pull something? And they're like, oh, I tried to do this weird thing that I saw. So I think it's just athlete dependent. And I think it's like trust dependent as well. Do I think that you're actually just going to do what I say to do in the weight room and not just hurt yourself somehow?
That's a great point. No weird Instagram stuff.
I'd agree with that. I think if it's first about what's the intent and how simple is the movement and how repeatable is the movement, then that kind of answers your question, right? Like, can you go in the training space and trust them to be in there safely? I also like what Tommy presented about intention, right? Like, because sometimes the intention doesn't necessarily have to be in the other space, right? So some of the exercise selection or the choices that we make in terms of what's going to complement training, some of that could be done trackside under, let's say, minimal supervision, because I can be in a different space and something can be happening on the other side of the track. But I can have, a lens on it, like I can have eyes on it and have an understanding of, okay, this is being achieved well. Do I see, big squeeze, hard pulls, high effort? Do I see variety? Then I can almost watch that from afar. And that's sometimes easier than going in, is that clean specific, right? Because I might have a good eye for what's happening on the track, but maybe I don't have a good eye for what's happening in the weight room.
Cool. What do you think, Tommy?
Two things I've seen over the years is that, as they both allude to, it depends on the athlete. And John, as you mentioned, there's always going to be sort of an introductory point where is the safety covered? Are the basics of what we're doing kind of, clear? And then there are some athletes who are very body or kinesthetically aware, and they self-correct really, really well. And so they can feel when they do a rep, oh, that didn't feel right. And then the next one, they correct it. And those are people that are going to be able to lift on their own quite competently. And then sort of this idea of like just being honest with yourself, and when are you feeling good and when are you not feeling good? I've, coached athletes that they try to empty the tank every single workout. And those are maybe people you don't want them to go on their own all the time, because they're just going to crush themselves. And then there are people that are not that great at putting in the effort. So if you leave them on their own, they're never going to push themselves. So if an athlete was going to lift on their own, I need to know they have enough awareness to self-correct, and they can be honest with themselves enough that today is a day where I can load, or today is a day where I gotta, live to lift another day, and just, focus on the next session.
Yeah. As with many things in life, it depends. So the next question, maybe the answer is the same, and it doesn't have to be a big long answer, but do you have group lifting sessions, or is it always kind of individualized? Again, I assume this is kind of, it depends on the group and stuff, but I don't know if anyone has anything particular to say on that.
I think at like the university and the club level, group lifting kind of has to be what's happening, because I don't think coaches have the time or the resources to individually program for 50 athletes, for example. And I think there's a good element of, team cohesion and, having the group together for that type of stuff. And then I think obviously once you get to the elite level, like if you had somebody who was trying to push for an Olympic Games or World Championships, stand on a podium, you're fighting for every percentage of like improvement in performance. And you may have to start programming individually to extract every bit out of it, because that's what you have to do at that level. As we're at the club level, for example, you can, find the low hanging fruit and make improvements that way.
Yeah, it's a great point about just the team cohesion, and again, different event groups will have different, let's say, cultures around lifting. And, from as a distance coach, sometimes it's just challenging to get the buy-in that this is something A, important, B, like that I really want to do. And so having the group there at least is this like, well, at least we're doing it together kind of thing, and then go from there. Kelsey, Nick, do you have anything to say on that? Because I don't know if that was the most in-depth of our questions. There's a whole bunch of questions, so we want to keep going.
I'm just going to redirect that back to Kelsey, because I would be, the only comment I'd make is like multiple athletes in the same space, they're going to hopefully learn from each other. And if Kelsey's in the weight room, she might have more experience than, say, a first-year teammate if we're talking university, right? So that's something you can do. And maybe Kelsey can talk about her experience with that at different.
Great point.
Yeah, with me, I think that we always try to, at the club, we always try to get like the mentorship happening. So if a younger kid can see an older kid doing this, then they can be like, oh, I can do that too. And the same with me. If the kids see me doing something, then, oh, I can do that too. And so with the team cohesion, we try to just pair the kids so that the confidence is up and they're like, oh, I see someone, I can achieve that as well.
Yeah, awesome. So it sounds like, strength training, lifting can be a good opportunity for team building, for confidence building, not just building strength. So that's really cool. Okay. Now we're going to kind of next level, a little bit more detail, kind of, these particular questions. Big question, I think, I don't know, maybe not, but should the lifting be, before the training session, after the training session, as in the running or jumping, throwing training session, or on a separate day? Are there benefits, limitations to each? How do you try to plan in your particular areas? Kelsey, you're smiling the biggest this time. You can start.
I was smiling because I was in my head, I was thinking I'm going to let Tommy go first, and then I'm probably going to contradict what he's saying.
Well, it's okay.
No, so what I was going to say is, specifically for me, I like to lift before. I think I was just used to, I was trained that way in college. I did it. So when I came out of college, it was the same thing. And I think I just use it as a potentiation for the rest of my workout. I'm not a person that can come in flat on a hard day and just be able to run fast. I need to do something prior to get my body primed to actually do something. So some athletes are like that. Some athletes that I've worked with and trained with, they can't do that workout and then try to come back because either their system is already fried or there's too much to do. So you have to put it afterwards. There's been times of the year where it's not possible for me to lift before and I have to lift after. And so I think it depends on the person. With the club, it specifically is just timing. If you have time to do it before, great. If you don't, because you have to do it after practice, that's just what it has to be. And you just have to move with that and be malleable and be flexible with your training and move it that way and see what kids like. The more specific it'll get, the more elite you get, because you can be. But in the club aspect right now, we just do it when we have time.
You know what? That's a great answer, because I think sometimes people are worried about okay, I have to do this the right way and I have to do, this is the way. And if that's not the case, then that's great, because then you can adapt to what you're able to do.
And there's so many ways to do things. And like I said, I'm specifically a person that I want to lift beforehand because it sets up my week. It sets up that day. I lift afterwards, some practice if it's a circuit wise, to prepare me for the next day so that I'm starting my recovery when I'm doing that circuit. So it just has to be placed in different ways. So it's not always I'm going in there and lifting as heavy as I can. Maybe I'm doing a body weight circuit to prepare me for the next day or the next week or whatever it is.
All right, Tommy, are you going to contradict or?
No, I hate to say it depends. But exactly what Kelsey said, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because of course, everything you're doing to some extent is going to matter, but there's a rationale, there's a justification you can use for any of those options. And reality is, if you're not at the professional level, you probably have limitations around facilities or timing or other things that are completely out of your control. So you may have to lift before, you may have to lift after, whether it's what's best or what's not. The only thing I'd maybe bring to the table is maybe think about what's most important at that time for you. So if you're in season, maybe you want to get in your event area and focus on the technical, tactical stuff, first when you're fresh, and then deal with the lifting afterwards. Maybe earlier in the year, you want to focus on building up strength. You want to focus on building a certain physical quality, and maybe that's your priority. So you put that at the start of the session when you're fresh. So there's a number of different ways that you can do it. So the good news is there's kind of not really a wrong way to go about it. So regardless of what scenario you're in, you can make it work.
That's great. Good to hear.
That's really good. The two answers I have, also it depends, as everyone has said, but basically what's available to you, right? Because do you have time in a weight room? Do you have medicine balls? Do you have sandbags? What are you working with? Because that's going to dictate, available of equipment could dictate what you do, or when you do it, right? So I always go back to, is it repeatable, right? Do we have 20 med balls, or do we have 2 bars in the weight room? So that's when I say it depends. So equipment will dictate that a bit. And then the second part would be, if equipment aside, you're probably going to choose what's my intention for that day on the track. what is my intention in the weight room, and where does it affect the session, how I place it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So it's like I'm back at law school. It depends. Okay. So here's another question that might have that same answer, but we're going to ask it anyway. How do you balance, especially I think when introducing strength training, just having them do something, having a component of strength versus, I think one thing people think they need to look for, and maybe it's yes, and maybe it's no, the perfect technique. Like how much do we have to balance that with, like, it has to be like just so versus like, well, you know what, you need to just like load and explode and not worry too much about being perfect.
I mean, so I can start. Kelsey's probably just gonna say I had to start anyway, like last time. But for like safety is the number one thing. So you have to make sure you can safely perform an exercise. You would never want the technique to be so off, or if someone didn't have the equipment or anything set up correctly where there's the risk of them getting hurt, because that's a very preventable accident or injury that you wouldn't want to occur. I tend to the technique or the pattern that the athlete is employing needs to be good enough that we're going to get the adaptation. So if I want to do a power movement or a rate of force development, and I'm looking now for that load and explode element, if it's too complicated, so let's say someone's learning how to do weightlifting, clean or snatch, and now they're overthinking it, they may not actually be loading and exploding. They're kind of trundling their way through the exercise. So now I'm going the intent behind this. I'm not getting that change. So I'm probably going to go now to a simpler movement, like a barbell jump or a hex bar jump or a weight vest jump, something like that, where now I'm going to get that load and explode element out of it because I've simplified the movement so the intent can be behind it. So it's not so much the technique needs to be perfect, but the technique would need to be good enough that you're actually getting the quality that you're chasing. And so I tend to have the athletes I work with perform a movement that I think is simple enough that they can perform it with really strong intent so that we actually get the change.
Cool. Someone else want to jump in on that one?
I think with us, for our club kids, when we do our general strength, normally at the end of practice, it's a lot of their social time. And so since that aspect is important to them, if a kid isn't doing something perfect, but if they're just doing it and they're not going to hurt themselves, but they're also one of our shy kids that is finally branching out or something like that, where they're getting another aspect of training that might not be specifically training, those things are still important. So I'll just leave it be and just be like, if you're going to hurt yourself, or if you're doing it really crappy over and over again, okay, I'll say something. But if you're enjoying yourself, I'll just leave you be.
The other thing too is that if it's safe, like an incorrect rep isn't always the end of the world. Like you need to make mistakes to learn. And so like there are a number of times where I'll let an athlete, as long as they're safe, if they're in the weight room, I might let them go 2 or 3 sets without actually giving them feedback on what they're doing right or wrong, because I want to see what they're figuring out and what they're not figuring out. And it can help narrow my coaching focus. And, people can sometimes figure this stuff out on their own. So if you're venturing into the weight room, everything doesn't have to be perfect from rep 1. It's okay for people to make mistakes. They're going to have to figure it out as they go along, as long as it's not like a huge safety risk.
Great.
Both those points I agree with. If you look back at Tommy's first general strength slide, I think there was something about wide variety and leaving reps in the bank, right? It's lower fatigue. It's a sampling. So I think in that instance, like that's a perfect example. Go right after practice. It can be social. It doesn't have to be a perfect rep every single time. That's something that's safe. As he said, in the weight room, it depends on the exercise, right? If it's a heavy loaded back squat, he's probably going to keep an eye on it. But if it's a fairly light loaded trap bar jump, right? Where the weight is not over top them and the execution is go up really fast. He's looking for different things, I would think.
Makes sense. Thanks for these answers. I think it's really important for people to hear that from, like experts like you, that it's not all about perfection, all the time. And hopefully that can kind of open it up and have people, maybe doing more of this stuff. So I hope that lands well. So kind of a bit of a rapid fire here, just about different types of athletes. So are there any specific considerations that you would have for men or women lifting, younger versus older athletes, in particular masters athletes? Is there a particular age when people should start lifting? Do you have any, specific considerations for those groups?
Oh, I couldn't tell where everyone, I don't know where everyone is on the screen. So I couldn't tell. I just saw the nod and I wasn't sure what direction that was. For me personally, men versus women, not really a big difference. The demands of the sport are the same. So you have to prepare them equally for what they're going to deal with. Age to start lifting. I mean, climbing monkey bars, climbing trees, all those things are forms of strength. So as long as you're not like really just jamming people with load, there's a lot of safe things you can do with youth athletes, with jumping and hopping and landing off of things and climbing that develop strength. So if it's done well, I don't think there's a at 12 it's okay, but at 11 it's not okay. And I think with masters athletes, it's a big question of load management, or managing the volumes and the intensities. They're still competing in the sport of track and field. The demands are no different. But maybe they've had, accumulations of injuries over the years. So you may have certain things you cannot do anymore. But at the end of the day, it comes down to load management. Probably still going to keep some higher intensity things in there to prepare them for competition in the event, but you may not be able to do the volume that you used to be able to do with that type of stuff.
So the only two things I've had, similar vein, like if I'm just going to talk masters athletes, it's usually individual, but most of the conversations I have are about how do I get to the next training session well. So when is your next day and what are you expecting to get? And because you're not always going to feel the same, I think you have to really listen to your body and take what's given to you on that day. So if you have two types of strength workouts that you can do on your own, and you can make an assessment at the end of a session, where am I truly at, and choose the appropriate one, I think that will go a long way. So a lot of it is about the coach knowing the athlete and trusting the athlete, having conversations like we talked about, and then the athlete being able to go in and make that choice. And typically athletes are pretty sensitive, right? They're very in tune with their bodies and they know what's going on.
And all I was going to say with masters athletes, I feel like it's just movement wise, making sure that their movements can be free flowing depending on, like Tommy said, the injuries that they've had before, or even what age of masters levels they're at. It just depends on movement and being able to like move well and continue to move well. And as long as you can do that and add a little bit strength in there so that you can move well and you can take that force, again, it's just setting up what you're going to do on the track. And then age of starting lifting, kind of what Tommy said, like we as a club start our kids generally in high school range, because that's kind of when they have a little bit more flexibility with that. But before then, obviously they're doing stuff, but we kind of start our kids more specifically in that. And that's just kind of what we do with our club.
All right. Thanks for those great answers. Okay, getting a little bit more into the weeds now, maybe. Sort of have a few questions here that came in that are all around the same idea, which is, I guess, the topic of periodization. So I'll try to merge the questions together a bit. Like, how does strength training change over the year in terms of, base early season and then peak season? If you're trying to peak twice, like someone had the example of OFSA and then legions or OFSA nationals or something like that. And yeah, I mean, like, okay, let's leave it at that one. So just kind of a general idea of periodization, like how does, I'm not saying like throw up your your YTP, but like how do things change over time? Are there particular things you're focusing on different times a year?
Well, as we get closer to competition, we tend to focus more on the qualities of the attributes that are going to influence performance the most. So like on a very kind of broad example of how you might periodize throughout the year, at the very start, you might have very equal amounts of, the different strength qualities present in your training. But then as you move closer and closer to competition, you're probably going to pull back on some of the ones that aren't as important or don't create a difference in performance. So for example, general strength, someone could be the greatest at general strength. They could be the worst. It's probably not going to determine who's the best or worst in a hurdle or a hurdle race or a throw or something like that. So as we move closer to the competition and our season, we pull back on the qualities that aren't quite as important or don't determine performance, and we put a little more stock in the qualities that matter for performance. And then obviously that depends on the event, because some of the different event areas have, different qualities that'll determine performance.
It depends again, apparently.
It depends on the event, but the idea of starting with a little bit of everything and pulling back on what's not important and adding more of what is important, it probably holds true across the event areas.
So we go back to your quadrant thing to kind of get a sense of like what is important. Would you say?
Yeah, and what actually determines the outcome of performance, like what makes the difference in your event and what qualities kind of contribute most of that.
Cool. Kelsey, maybe to focus further for you as an athlete, do you recall, kind of a really positive experience of strength training into a good competition, like some, time when it really clicked for you? Is there anything about that you could share?
I think that during different parts of my career, I've been more light and heavy on how much I'm in the weight room, just depending. And so I think that specifically for me, I love being in the weight room, and it's part of like just being there. Some athletes don't like being in the weight room, but I like being in there. So and just as a female, we try to push a heavy load a little bit further than maybe someone else.
Did you say as a female?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's something I have heard, that women can kind of maintain loading closer or maybe need to closer to a competition than men do. Is that something you've all heard? Or that at a conference down south in NACAC?
Yeah, so for me, how I think about it is just like in the weight room, sometimes like it's just recovery wise, female athletes sometimes can recover because they don't push themselves as much as a male would. And so it's just the physiological response that happens, or that like the adaptation that's happening. And so specifically for me, if I go and I periodize too early and I try to cut too early and get too specific, then I'm going to lose too much when I get to the competition, and I'm not going to be primed to go. So if I push that a little bit longer, and then as Tommy said, put those specific things that are going to make me ballistic, that are going to make me fire and have like less reps, but very powerful and very quick, then that's going to set me up to do the same thing when I'm on the track. And so that's kind of how we've navigated through it. And then again, it just depends on the year. Like during COVID, I couldn't be on the track as much because it wasn't possible. I didn't have a space to do that. So we put all our intensity, not all of our intensity, but a lot of our intensity in the weight room, so that at least I had that intensity there, and then I could bring it to the track. And so it just depends on where you want to place it. And in competition, you back off a little bit so that you're as quick as you, and you're not having that soreness where I can't lift my legs, I can't walk because I'm so sore, but then how am I supposed to go race if I can't even move? So it's the transition of finding that balance of keeping the strength and the power, but still being able to move.
Makes sense. That's great. So, I mean, I have another audience question, starting audience questions now, and there's one that relates specifically to something you just said, which is Are there any signs that you see in an athlete that that max strength is starting to impact negatively on the speed, like the running speed, power, and that sort of thing? Is there a time when that, or is there a sign of that you can see?
I've seen some anecdotal evidence from strength coaches where once you kind of get to like 1.7, or what, this is specifically around squat, but you could probably extrapolate it to other things. But with squatting, once people were around like 1.7 or 1.8 times their body weight, it was kind of like diminishing returns. So it's sort of like, what's strong enough? So if you can move that type of load, then you've probably developed enough strength to be fast. And so if you start chasing, numbers that are beyond that, then it's not giving you the return that you're potentially looking for. So that's, again, kind of a ballpark figure. I know in the throws realm, Dr. Bondarchuk has those charts around, what's good enough in snatch and bench press and other exercises to throw certain distances. And at some point this is enough, go focus on something else. So I don't know of any other resources kind of out there, but that's kind of a ballpark figure.
For me, it's just if a kid can move, or a person can just move their body. If they're too big, or they have too much strength, or again, like the training is almost overloading, then they can't move it. And so you have to play with that. How strong can you be, but keep lean muscle, not just bulking wise, depending on your event, to be able to move that body. And if they are looking like their running style is changing because they've bulked up too much, then it has to pull back because they can't move their strength. They can't move their body, and it's not productive.
Okay. There seems to be a bit of a preoccupation with this particular topic, because there's a couple other questions that turn around it. So I'm going to go to those. I have a question from a jumps coach, vertical and horizontal jump coach. This coach says, we work on strength and power to build base and then move to more event specific drills and hopefully maintain strength and power. As a coach, should we expect the athlete to lose, I guess, some strength and power, or can plyometrics and hurdle hopping and applied drills maintain that strength and power?
Yeah, absolutely. You can maintain it. At the end of the day, the nervous system still needs to send really powerful signals to the muscles. And whether you are doing power work or, jumping, bounding, sprinting, heavy lifting, that holds true across the board. So if you've developed a very good base of strength and you have high strength levels, that type of stuff is going to help maintain that, because it's still, the neural drive is incredibly high. And once you've built up a good strength of like a base of strength, strength is a really easy quality to maintain, in the sense that even if you went into the weight room and just did a couple of sets at 80 to 90%, once you've developed it, and if you keep that sort of a maintenance thing, it's very difficult to lose that quality. And it's a very resilient quality compared to other ones as well. So if you spent a lot of time developing strength in season, you could get into the weight room once a week, do a couple of sets of your big strength exercises, 80 to 90%, and you're probably not going to notice a difference in terms of, the athlete's not strong enough to be in their event anymore.
Okay. And so related to that, another question was, can you suggest tests in season to see if power and strength are dissipating? But maybe that's the test. Maybe that's if you're consistently going in and your squat at, 90% is still fine, and it's still, be able to do it and it looks good, then is that a good sign? Or are there other things? Should you even measure that? Should you even be worried about it? Because as you said, it's resilient. Nick, we haven't heard from you in a while. Feel free to jump in. Sorry, I feel like I keep changing the question right as soon as you're about to say something.
The only thing I have to kind of add to all that is we should consider density, like how often we're training throughout the year, and we should consider, like as Tommy said, the specificity of, or the length of that session. So obviously earlier in the year, maybe you're not traveling, you're not competing, you have more time to address more qualities, let's say. And as you get closer to the season, you get more specific. So that's the only thing I wanted to add in terms of how you blend it over the year. In terms of measurement, I've seen all sorts of things in terms of measuring power throughout the year. Someone with a multi-jump test on a force band that's done over time. So they're measuring ground contacts, or they're measuring height of the jump. I've also seen a really good coach who just does the med ball throw at the beginning of every practice. So it's the same thing at the same time that you can measure the distance over time. So it really depends what you have. But it could be very simple, or it could be very, very targeted.
To build on Nick's comment, like any of those, like a vertical jump, a standing long jump, the med ball throws, those are really good blends between sort of the speed and rate of force development, but then also requiring some like high levels of strength to be able to project the ball or your body. And so those are really good tests because they bring the two of them together. So if you start to see, positive changes, you're doing the right thing. But if you see a bit of a drop off, I think, like Nick, that's a great point. I think those are awesome things that most of us could probably do a standing long jump in our settings because that's very easy to do. But those types of movements are great to monitor. Are we strong and powerful and fast, and kind of bringing it all together.
And I guess the last thing I wanted to add is to Kelsey's point that she's made on a few of these, like quality of movement, right? Like if we're good at one thing, it's watching people and how do they move and how do they move continuously over time. So, it could be as simple as, man, that person looks tired, or that jump was not nearly as good, or there was a lot of amortization on that one. So, not that mistakes like we talked about before are important, but if they're happening consistently, maybe it's a sign of something.
Okay. So actually, this question relates a bit to what we've been talking about, and I'm going to ask this one, and then there's one other one after this, I think, and then I think that's it. So hopefully people can stick around. I know we're close to the hour, and we want to respect people's time, but we have two more. So the question is, how do you quantify training load during the strength conditioning session? So do you use RPE? Do you use specific tools or apps to determine the load? I mean, I assume that they're asking other than, pounds or kilograms of weight on the bar. Is there a velocity-based training? How is this measured? I think, I'm coming from a distance training perspective, like we know how to measure stuff. But
love that.
In the weight room though, how do you?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways you can do it. RPE is a great example. I know a number of people that are weightlifting coaches or powerlifting coaches. So they're in a sport that is a strength sport, and they will often use RPE with their athletes to figure out where they're at. You could also go by volume load too. So you multiply the sets and the reps and the weight that you do for each of those sets. And then you can see, someone lifted 6,000 pounds this week. And then all of a sudden they lifted 12,000, they doubled the load. Maybe that wasn't our intention. So that can be a really good way to kind of keep track of what's going on. I mean, velocity-based training is awesome, but we probably don't have the financial resources to use that in a lot of settings. So volume load can be a great way, and RPE where it's got a no dollar value attached to it.
Kelsey, what about you for the sort of the club high school level kids? Is there a way that you keep track of how much work they're doing strength wise?
I think that in like our controlled environment, we just try to measure it in getting kids out to do something, because some kids will show up once a week, some kids will show up 5 days a week. And so to monitor how many times 100 kids come out is very difficult. But at the same time, the kids that come out for 5 days a week, that those kids are there. So you can monitor them to make sure that they're not overtraining. And the other kids that just kind of come the 2 or 3 or 1 day a week, that you're not overloading them anyways. And then just being specific on what other sports these kids play. And if they are playing 10 other sports and they're doing 12 other things, then they come in, then there's a balance in that. I don't need kids that go and play basketball to come and do plyos with me because they're jumping every day in basketball practice. And so just seeing where the cross in sports happens as well. But so we just measure it kind of in that way. And then again, if kids are coming every day and I know that they're track specific kids, we know who those kids are, and it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to manage those kids because I kind of know what they're doing more.
Makes sense. Nick, I feel like you have some cool way or something. I don't know.
I have nothing to do with that. I guess the only thing that was indirectly said would be time, right? Like Kelsey talked about number of sessions, how often are you seeing them? And then I would say, how long are you seeing them? Because that's going to dictate, like sometimes the facility would dictate that you got to be out of here by this time. So you get in when you get in. Other times it spreads longer, right? We've all seen the athlete that likes to milk the session, right? It's taking longer. It's filling time unnecessarily. So I think those
called recovering.
Yeah.
I'm recovering. Okay. I'm recovering.
So that would be the only thing that I would add. I like what Tommy said. RPE is great one. Total volume within the week, but then the other one metric I would use is like duration.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So kind of on a similar note, the last question I've got here from our audience, and thanks everyone's awesome questions. I think we could probably do another one of these strength sessions. This has been a really good webinar, I think. So this coach says that I've been told that core and postural strength can be effectively trained with more frequent sessions than other muscle groups, even daily. So we're talking about kind of core stuff. Do you have thoughts on this? Is it okay to do kind of core stuff every day, or is that not enough kind of recovery time?
That can be, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to the intensity. So most, call it torso core stability exercises we do are relatively low intensity in nature. So you could get away with doing it in every training session. If you started to do, super heavy farmer carries where you had, a 400-pound hex bar and you were walking with it, that you might not be able to, come back to every single day. So, but typically most body weight stability stuff you could do.
Right. Could you do like a set of max push-ups every day? Like just do as many push-ups as you can and just do it every day?
Oh, you might get fried at some point, but I mean, it's going to depend. If you have someone who can't do a push-up, one push-up would be like max strength for them. Yeah. But if you had someone who could do 200 push-ups, then the relative load is so much lighter that you might be able to get away. Why are you trying to do push-ups to failure every day?
I was doing it last summer.
Okay.
I just want to see what would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an athlete that I need to worry about breaking. If I break myself, that's okay.
I also just want to interject too, is that I feel like track coaches sometimes specify core as just doing abs, but core can be so much more, and you can use your core in so many other exercises. So you could be working it, doing general strength or lifting or doing other things, and it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to do a plank for 5 minutes straight, or I'm going to do whatever.
Well, like hurdle drills, hurdle mobility is core, right?
Exactly, because everything is related to hurdles.
Yeah, everything's all about the hurdles.
And everything goes through the spine at some point, so everything has a bit of a core torso element.
Didn't you start with barriers, Tommy?
Sorry?
Didn't your presentation start with all the barriers?
Most important thing.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. We're really thankful to have you all here to share your expert experiences. And thanks everybody for coming to listen and asking great questions. Just wanted to again, reiterate our next big event, which is the Atlantic Speed Power Summit, and the link for that it's in the chat again. There's also a link to the panels as a separate link. So Kyle's gonna make sure that Kyle just put it in there. So lots more online stuff happening in the month of April, and then we're gonna take a little break for the summer. Let people get the full outdoor season in with hopefully no COVID problems or anything, and then back in the fall with more stuff. So thanks again, everybody. Happy track season coming up soon.